Rikyaon family. All praise to the Most High. So today we will be debunking more heathens. So I know a lot of you guys are familiar with my fake pyramids of shit video. And most of you, if you've been following me for a while, you are very apt to a lot of my research as it pertains to the true Holy Land and the true ancient Holy Lands. So today I will be proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that America is Egypt. And when I say America is Egypt, America, or the Americas, is a portion of the land that ancient Egypt used to lie in. Now, for a lot of people who are new to this theory, I don't even call it a theory, this is the truth. The other place isn't even a theory, it's a theme park that they set up over there and they refabricated world history. This is beyond a shadow of a doubt. So what I will be doing today, especially for you skeptics, I will be debunking all of your quote unquote academia, all of your top scholars. I'll be debunking all heathens today. And we'll be doing it using the same resources that they've been using. Now, just the name Egypt in general is synonymous with the Old Testament, correct? So when we're looking at this, and even when we're talking about models of the world, understand that much of the geography that we think is the true geography of the earth is based upon the Old Testament. So what I'll be doing today is not only going through the history of ancient Egypt, but I'm going to be going through the history of ancient Egypt as it exchanges hands into kingdoms. In addition to exchanging hands into kingdoms, we'll also be running parallel the biblical timeline with what we think ancient Egypt's timeline is. So before we get started, understand that Hebrew and Egyptian chronology is at odds with one another. To believe Egyptian chronology means that during the entire flood of Noah, Egypt was at the height of its prosperity. So how is that even possible? If Egyptian chronology is supposed to be taken legitimately, does that mean that the flood didn't exist? Or does that mean that Egyptian chronology as we know it has been totally fabricated? Now, before we even get into that, and I will be giving you guys an outline, and I'll also be giving you guys plenty of cited academic resources in order to fact check a lot of the information that I'm putting here. So especially for you skeptics, when we're going along the lines of trying to define Mitzraim from Egypt, you'll understand what I'm talking about, because chances are, if you're a skeptic on this subject, you're probably not doing your research correctly. And very easily and effectively, I will be debunking all of the bullshit. So by the end of the video, you will know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Americas are indeed the lands of ancient Egypt, in addition to a lot of other ancient holy lands as well. So don't just think that I'm saying that the entire landscape of America was all ancient Egypt. All right. So let's get into defining the context of Egypt. There are two ways that we can define Egypt. Okay. First of all, we can define it simply as Mitzraim, which is the son of Ham. Now, the word Egypt itself is Greek. Now, of course, we speak a bastardized language as the words are flowing out of my pie hole. We don't really understand the true contextual meaning behind, or the difference behind the contrast of the word Mitzrayim and Egypt. First of all, let's just get down to the foundational definition of Mitzrayim was not just the son of Ham, okay? Mitzrayim actually has dual meaning. Mitzrah and Ayim actually have two different meanings. Now, when we're looking at this in a biblical context, other than Mitzrayim, other than being the son of Ham, is supposedly the name representative of the lands of ancient Egypt. Okay? So, over time, obviously, once the Greek took over, things got translated over. And much of the meaning of the words and the definitions that we think we know, this is exactly where much of the contextual understanding gets lost. So, Mitzraim, son of Ham, also the land of the upper and lower Egypt. Okay, so we want to say upper or lower Egypt. These are descriptive adjectives based upon who ruled each area. So, in addition to Mitzrayim and Ayim, the dual meaning for upper and lower Egypt. All right. So, upper Egypt was said to be ruled by Horus, and lower Egypt is said to be ruled by Set. So, the contextual odds that these two, I don't know what you want to call them, deities or even rulers at the time, because we don't really know the context and what they actually mean. Because we know that these are deities. We know these are Egyptian deities. But we also know that at some point in the past that the gods intermingled with human, and in many ways, half human, half whatever you want to call them, were considered gods on earth. And we're going to be really getting into that as we discuss the lineage and history of Egypt. So, for example, you have upper that has to do with Horus, lower that has to do with Set. Something I noticed just geographically, when you think about it, Horus and Set, the sunrise and sunset. So you could look at it essentially like east and west, north and south, however you want to look at sunrises. That's what seems to be going on here. So an additional meaning is the house of Ptah, okay? Now, I really want to go over this because I think this is probably one of the most important meanings or important adjectives as we're going into understanding Egypt on an etymological level, okay? So the Egyptian deity Ptah, P-T-A-H, the P is silent. And so I didn't say this, but Ptah is pronounced Ptah. All right? Now, we can see that there. And Ptah is the Egyptian creator god. Similar to the accounts in Genesis, it is stated through Egyptian myth that Ptah not only thought of the world into existence, he also spoke the world into existence. So thought and spoke the world into existence. So when we're looking at this, when you're just the name Ptah, if we were to, for those of you who have seen The Smartest Beast in the Field, when we're going back to Genesis, this would be almost a similar deity to what they're saying the Genesis 1 creator is. All right? The land of Ptah. The house of Ptah. So, in short, who is Ptah? The creator god. So that would be the house of the creator god. All right? Now, we're going to get a little bit deeper because now we're going to go to what the word Egypt means today and how it got that meaning. All right? So, obviously, there was a time when Greece, and we'll be talking about this, and we're going to go through scripture as well. We're going to go through scripture chronologically, so you're going to see these places that come up. You're going to see mainly Egypt, and you're going to see the context in which Egypt comes up each time as we go throughout scripture, telling stories, okay? So we're going to start off with Abraham, and then we're going to end with the fall of Egypt when it gets into the hands of Rome. And we're going to really analyze the stories in between. Now, of course, when we're analyzing the stories in between, we cannot go with Egyptian history because there is none there from the standpoint that includes the world. So, of course, we will be using scripture, and we'll be cross-referencing pretty much all of the major plot sequences in which Egypt plays somewhat of a role that we've talked about before. But we'll be expanding on that a lot more. So, Egypt obviously is a Greek word, okay? Now, this is where we're really going to get into not just scripture, but we're also going to have to just in order to understand the heathens and where they come from and their mythology and their history, we're going to have to get into mythology ourselves. Or we're going to have to cross-reference Egyptian mythology with Greek mythology. And we're going to be doing that, of course, with scripture. And what you're going to start seeing, things will start working themselves out. I'm really excited for those of you who've actually seen The Smartest Beast in the Field and you're caught up to the episodes, because this stuff kind of falls in line with understanding who's who in terms of genetics also. So let's tell the story of Greece and how Greece becomes Egypt. I'm actually not going to tell that story. That story will get told as I'm going through the history of the Bible. But right now, we're going to give you just what we're doing now is from an etymological standpoint. I'm going to show you how it becomes Egypt. Okay? Now, Egyptus, son of Belus, is who? Now, Belus just happens to be the son of Poseidon and Libya. So I want to, and this is where things get funny. All right. So you see here, Egyptus is the son of Belus. All right. Now, these people are all what you would call Greek gods, so to speak, or they're considered in the lineage of Greek gods. So you have Poseidon, then you have Libya. Now, I want to take a look at Libya really quickly, because Libya is said to be the lands. When I say the lands, we're going to go back, because now Libya has a name and it's a woman, and it is the mother of Egyptus, right? But the house of Lud under the Hamites, okay, were supposed to be represented by Libya. So this should be Lud, son of Ham. If we were going to draw these connections here, and if we don't even know that this is Libya, daughter of Lud. We don't know that. Here's what we do know. That she is what we like to call, where's it at? I don't even see it on here. She's part of the catalog of women. All right, I didn't see it here. So she's part of the catalog of women. So back in the day, there were women who were from certain lineages who were selected. Okay, they were selected as breeding partners or sources of eggs for Greek gods, or I would say split angel human lineages. So the catalog of women is a very interesting just concept in general, where as opposed to men just going out and getting a woman, there's actually, I don't know what it is, a group of women. And I guess you could look it up as well. Now, this is just based off what I remember. But it's a group of women who are essentially born and bred to lay with, gods, so to speak. And so Libya is supposedly part of the catalog of women. So this gets even a little bit better. So Belus, the father of Egyptus, according to, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's Diodorus. Don't completely quote me on that. But it was one of these Roman, Greek scribes. According to Diodorus, or I don't know, one of the guys, Belus founded a colony on the Euphrates. Okay. In addition, he appointed priests, astrologers, aka Chaldeans. I know some of y'all say Chaldeans or Chaldees. I call them Chaldeans. All right. So we know here that the priest astrologers were Chaldeans. Now, for those of you who really get into scripture, you see that all the time. You always see the Chaldees, the Ur of the Chaldees. Where did Abraham come from? The Chaldees, the Chaldees. So even when we start cross-referencing what we know about Egyptian history, we can start to learn more about scripture and what's really going on in the stories and where the stories are taking place and who people are, or characteristics of certain nations. So we know for a fact that when we're talking about a Chaldean or a Chaldean, we're most likely talking about an astrologer, a priest astrologer. Okay? So, according to this legend, Belus founded a colony on the Euphrates and appointed priest astrologers, Chaldeans. So, a couple of things that I want to reconcile here. You see the word Euphrates, and I did check that. It is said Euphrates, but we all know that, Egyptus Nile, the Euphrates is in no way synonymous with the Nile in terms of what we think in our brains. But of course, if you saw one of the videos I did, I think it was the Babylon video, but we very easily debunked the fact that the Mississippi/Nile is the Euphrates. As a matter of fact, we know for a fact that the Nile was never mentioned by name in scripture as a specific river. And we know that when they're referring to the Nile, they're referring to a what? A stream, a brook, or a tributary of a much larger body of water, and not a single body of water. And what I have also done is I pulled up a few verses in the Bible as well that we'll look at in the actual Torah and the Tanakh. We'll actually look at some geographic characteristics that we can use to easily debunk the Nile River being over there. So it's a beautiful thing, but we also know that the Nile is synonymous with Egypt, but we also know that it's not the Nile that we are talking about. The Nile are Nilios or Nelios, okay? And we've gone through this again. Is the Greek river god. Okay? So, one of the first things you must understand here is that the meanings between the Nile and the Euphrates have been confounded into two different rivers. Okay? You have the Euphrates, then you have the Nile. Same river. All right? The Euphrates is the big, the Nile is the little. And I don't even want to call it the Nile being the little. The Nile is referred to are the brooks, creeks, or streams of the much larger river, the great river, the Euphrates. Okay? So just essentially, the meanings of those two rivers have been confounded in our brains. And it's interesting because we all know about the Nile, and we can tell that Egyptian history in many ways gets pushed into our brain academically, because for some reason people don't seem to want to give true credit to the only history book that matters, and that's the Torah. Because the Torah is the foundation of all this knowledge, and we can actually see that. We can, once we understand the words that were written down for us to finally understand, we can actually see a lot of this stuff being played out. So we know what's true, we know what's false, we know what's being attributed to these people is actually something that came long before them. And so learning the Torah is just foundational to understanding how deception works, okay? So we all know that the Nile is the Euphrates, the Nile being tributaries, creeks, or streams. They literally confounded the meaning of this word. Now getting back to Egyptus, son of Belus, this is where the current lands of Egypt have been named. Or this is for whom the current lands of Egypt have been named. Egyptus, son of Belus, founded a colony on the Euphrates. Appointed priest astrologers. Now this is coming from the Greek, okay guys? We got to understand something. That a lot of the accounts that you're going to read, the Strabos, the Herodotus, the Diodoras, the whoever does it, the Herodotus, I already forgot the dude's name. Anybody who you see during who's actually transliterating a lot of this past history, they're doing it in the Greek era. Okay, so this has already been, much of this history has already been established, and what they are doing from this point on is transliterating it into their own understanding. All right. And this is where things get lost in translation. Sometimes purposely, sometimes accidentally. So Egyptus. So the myth about Egyptus is he had 50 sons. 50 sons with multiple different women. I'm not sure if he actually caught Antonio Cromartie, but, or I'm not sure if Antonio Cromartie caught him, but I'm sure he's close. But the myth of 50 sons and the Danaids, all right, or Danaids. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. But apparently Egyptus had 50 sons. And he set his sons to get married to his brother's daughters. And his brother tells his daughters to murder their husbands on their wedding night. So according to the legend, 49 of the 50 sons actually got murdered. And then the 50th son who didn't get murdered avenged his brother's deaths. And so this is a little mythology tied around Egypt. So I want you guys to go ahead and write this down because we're going to keep it moving. I just want to make sure that we get this. Oh yeah, I didn't even talk about this. We'll talk about this really quickly. We're going to get into this later. But the ancient name that the Egyptians called Egypt was Meri. Okay? So we can see a few things here, okay? So we already know Ptah and Meri have a few different meanings, and you'll actually hear be pronounced Tamara or Tamara, okay? But what we should know is Ptah and Meri, etymologically, we know that the syllables actually break up the phonetical meanings of both of those sounds. So we've got Meri, and we can actually go ahead and relate that to who? Ptah, okay? That's easy. Now, I'm sure that somebody else has their own proclamation of exactly what the meaning is, but that's right there in the Egyptian hieroglyphic dictionary. It's right there, Meri. And then you also have Meri meaning stone. Okay, so if we were to combine those words, that would be Ptah stone, or the stone of Ptah. Interesting, the stone of Ptah. The stone of Ptah. Meri. What does that also sound like? If we were to reverse the syllables, it would be Meri Ptah. Interesting. Meri Ptah. Meri. Kind of sounds like this place I know. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Make sure you get the notes because we're going to be going on to the next board scribble. Hopefully you can read all that stuff. And what I'll do is I'll zoom in as well.
This is true for some periods, but for others, like the ancient empire, we know very little. And that's why, finally, your questions are ours. When it comes to the building of the pyramids, we have a lot of theories, but no written account.
Appendix B, the problem with Egyptian chronology. In 1886, historian George Rawlinson began his chapter on Egyptian chronology with this statement. It is a patent fact, and one that is beginning to obtain general recognition, that the chronological element in early Egyptian history is in a state of almost hopeless obscurity. There are several kinds of chronological documents, including the actual monuments. The chronological value of these various sources of information is, however, in every case, slight. The great defect of these monuments is their incompleteness. The Egyptians had no era. They drew out no chronological schemes. They cared nothing but to know how long each incarnate god, human or bovine, had condescended to tarry on the earth. They recorded carefully the length of life of each Apis bull and the length of the reign of each king, but they neglected to take note of the intervals between one Apis bull and another, and omitted to distinguish the sole reign of a monarch from his joint reign with others.
And we are back. You can go ahead and take these notes here. So what we're going to be doing now is we're going to take a detailed trip through scripture, and in particularly, we're going to be highlighting Egypt. And in each place that Egypt comes up. Now, obviously, Egypt and Canaan are places that are mentioned, I don't know, a lot. Probably over, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Egypt has over 400 mentions, okay? So I looked at all 400 of them, but I'm not going to present you with every time the word Egypt comes up, because we're really just looking to really just try to understand certain things. Now, if there's a place where Egypt comes up that that should be looked at, that maybe I haven't covered throughout this video, definitely bring it to my attention, which I will be happy to look at, because more so than anything, right now, too much information doesn't exist. So any information that we can credibly ascertain that leads us to the truth is well worth the time of investigation. So first, we are going to be looking at the first time that the word Egypt is brought up in scripture. Now, I want to make this point again. In the first part, we define the differences between Mitzraim and Egypt. So for consumption purposes, I'm just going to be using Egypt throughout, because that is the tongue in which I speak. This is a bastardized Greek variation of whatever language that they were trying to hide. So what we're trying to do now is just figure out what are the characteristics of Egypt. So in Genesis 12:10, which is the first mention of Egypt in the Old Testament, or really in the Torah, Genesis 12:10. Okay? Now, in what context is Egypt mentioned? So there was a famine in the land, and of course, Abram at the time, him and his wife Sarai, go down to Egypt to sojourn, or to basically take refuge. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the story, but we could talk about that a little bit later. Okay, the point of this is just to say, okay, there was a famine in the land and they went to Egypt as a place of refuge. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put a famine refuge in terms of a theme that can be legitimately ascertained just by reading Genesis 12:10. So what that means is they had food. More so than anything, we know that there was food in Egypt, all right? So now there was a whole story that happened, and eventually Abram ends up leaving Egypt with more riches. He literally goes down to Egypt, and he's literally afraid of his life because he's got a beautiful wife, and he tells his wife to say, if we get captured, tell me you're my sister so I can live. And of course, she does that, and by virtue of another man taking his wife, that other guy gets cursed, and of course, gives Abraham all of these gifts, and Abraham leaves Egypt with more than he came with. Okay, so that is another theme, all right? That is another thing, okay? So more than just a place of refuge, it's actually a place that you can come up out of and might be on the good side. So we don't know how broke or poor or how, humble Abram was at the time before he went to Egypt. I imagine he had to be somewhat humble if he didn't have food to feed himself and his wife, and he literally had to go somewhere else to get food. But when he returns from Egypt, he returns with riches. So you can go live the American dream or the Egyptian dream.